Yeah, teacher trainees, you are welcome back to my class. And this morning, I'm going to present before you the lesson entitled "Factors of the Process of Education." Uh, a careful analysis of the progress of compulsory education in India shows that the demand for compulsory education began in India rather very late. It gathered momentum very slowly and, owing to strong opposition from several quarters, came to be implemented only recently. Compulsion was enforced very slowly in one area after another, and they existed only in a few areas, mostly urban areas, and only in respect of boys. The causes of the failure are deeply rooted in the environment of the country, and the progress was arrested chiefly due to a number of factors, which I'm going to discuss one after another. Among them, physical factor play a very significant role. You see, the problem of primary education in the country is mainly a rural one. Since 82.7% of the Indian population lives in villages. But the British government developed a centralized system of administration and the neglected rural areas. Even at present also, it is very difficult to provide and organize primary education effectively in the rural areas, as school units are unusually small, adequate staff is expensive, the condition of life is not attractive to teachers, schools are scattered, and their inspection is not easy, and the difficulty to secure regular and prolonged attendance of children. Another great difficulty is encountered because of the absence of a good road and means of communication. And thirdly, the physical needs of schools, such as buildings and equipments, are not yet fulfilled in such areas. So, besides geographical barriers, are also no less responsible for the slow progress of primary education. As large areas are covered with hills and rivers, it is difficult to enter these places to set up schools. The teachers of the plan are not in a mood to serve in an unhealthy area, and there is always a preference of urban areas over the rural areas. So, as the villages are sparsely populated and greatly isolated, it becomes extremely difficult to set up one school for a population of 300. Social factor is another important, factor that affect greatly to the growth and the development of education, specifically the compulsory primary education in the country. Indian society, if I'm not mistaken, I should say, is a heterogeneous one. Racial discrimination and untouchability are still rampant in different parts of the country. There is a strong popular prejudice and a superstition against female education, though this prejudice is first subsiding, yet it will take long time to die forever. And another condition associated with the social side is the Parda system, the child marriage, the problem of coordination, co-education, and appalling illiteracy among large masses of population is huge stumbling blocks in the path of the spread of primary education in a country. The problem of universal primary education in India is, from social point of view, essentially the problem of women, the untouchables, the aborigines, the hill tribes, and other backward communities. Political factor is again significant in deciding the progress of primary compulsory education in India. I'm telling you, the wide enthusiasm of the pre-independence era is being gradually chilled with the march of time, Immediately after independence, the national government was preoccupied with problems like the partition of the country, rehabilitation of evacuees, integration of native states, distant condition after the Second World War, solving the border dispute, language issue, and communal problems, etc. Consequently, it had very little or no time to concentrate on the directives of Article number 45 of the Constitution of India. These are the mighty political problems which directly or indirectly impeded the progress of compulsory education in the country. So besides the above-mentioned factors, a number of administrative factors also stand on the way towards the progress of primary compulsory education in India. To be speak frankly, the problems of compulsory education are essentially an administrative problem. It necessitates setting up of an elaborate administrative machinery to establish and maintain adequate number of primary schools in proper places. Unfortunately, on some of these issues, the Indian administration had taken wrong decision, which has now become obstacles to future progress. And these are categorized in 3 points. First is the low priority accorded to education in general administrative structure. Second, the lower place accorded to primary education in relation to other educational activities. And the third, the transfer of the control and responsibility of primary education to local bodies. There was also difficulties in legislation which retarded the progress of compulsory education. Gandhiji had already sounded the warning by pointing out that if the majority wants education, compulsion is wholly unnecessary. If it doesn't, compulsion would be most harmful. Almost all the states passed laws for enforcement of compulsory education, but compulsion existed on paper only. While in other states it was quite unsatisfactorily functioning and bringing it almost to radical. But luckily, enforcement of the Right to Education Act 2009 much favored the spread of free and compulsory primary education in the country. Besides legislation, manifold difficulties like collection of census, then publication of the list of non-attending children, serving individual notices to parents, dealing with exemptions and excuses, issuing attendance orders, penalties for employing children out of school going age, and above all, inadequate and improper machinery for enforcement were all serious difficulties in the way of making legislation effective. So now let me touch upon the economic and the financial factors that greatly affect to the progress of primary compulsory education in India. The most formidable obstacle for universal primary education is the colossal poverty of the masses and the consequent poverty of the state. I should say nearly 30% out of the total population earn money to fulfill the bare necessities of life. But majority of the people of our country live from hand to mouth, and during the British rule, the poverty of the masses had been worsened still further because of the population explosion, disappearance of traditional handicrafts, economic exploitation from abroad, failure to develop the agricultural and industrial resources of the country. Today, therefore, the average parents are not at all in a position to send their children to school and to maintain them there on a full-time basis till they reach the age of 14. So, poverty of the parents is the foremost reason which prevents the child from attending schools, and it is impossible on their part to bear the expenditure incurred in educating their children. Moreover, small children are also employed in earning some money for supplementing their parents' income. Parents do not think it desirable to sacrifice the immediate income derived from the small children than the doubtful material benefit to be derived after the period of completed education. I should say the lure of immediate returns blurs the prospects of future dividend to be head of the educated children. Mostly in rural areas, the children step into their father's profession at an early age, which hinders their education. The parents think it better to pass over the skills they acquire in their hereditary profession to the children than to engage them in any other work. You see, India is a country which is inhabited by a large number of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population. They live in primitive ignorance and they are culturally and educationally so backward that their disinclination for education acted as a sake on any better progress. Besides it, for vast majority of backward class, life is a problem of hunger and want. Therefore, children share the duties of the adults and participate in daily activities for earning the livelihood. It is also true that the local bodies have failed to accelerate the progress of compulsory education due to the lack of funds. The state government pays mere lip sympathy and hardly gives adequate aid. The central government seldom comes to their rescue, and it is no wonder that the local bodies cannot carry out their educational programs. Therefore, the total expenditure on primary education is made from five different sources, which include central government grants, state fund, local bodies resources, fees collected from the students, and other sources. So, fees were once looked upon as an indispensable source of revenue for primary education, but fees were curtailed in 1921 and finally abolished in 1937. So therefore, other sources are indefinite, nominal, and unreliable, and in the amount is very, very meager. Education being state subject mainly, the central government doesn't make any direct grant except meeting the expenditure in centrally administered areas. Sometimes it gives lump sum grants to state government for providing elementary education, and the state government grants are, main source for primary education. And the side by side, local funds contribute a part of their income to primary education, but their share is also dwindling due to poor financial and other accidents. However, the educational history shows that the safe of compulsory education is rarely launched because the signal of monetary storms is always on, and that if it is launched at all by any reckless enthusiast, it comes to grief on some financial rock sooner or later. Well, my dear teacher trainees, our country, India, has been experiencing population explosion since many decades. From the table, it is clear that the country's total population have increased from 55.5 crore in 1971 to 121 crore in 2011. While the growth rate ranges from 1.6% to 2.2%. But interestingly, the growth rate which was achieved to as high as 2.2% in 1981 and the 91 census record was drastically reduced to 1.6% in 2011. And today we are having more than 130 crores. You see, the present day Indian society is facing a mighty problem that is population explosion. The population is increasing by leaps and bounds. It is increasing in such a terrific rate that the extended educational facilities cannot keep pace with the population growth. Although the growth rate has been desirably reduced from 2.2% to 1.6% during a four-decade trend, the country's population increased enormously from 55.5 crore in 1971 to as much as 121 crore during 2011. So today, the nation is feeding more than 130 crore population, and if this rate of growth of population continues, India's target for educational expansion will remain hard to achieve. The problem in introducing universal compulsory education is not only limited to finding more finances and more teachers, but also to the lowering of birth rate. If birth rate continues to increase, more central continue to put a demand on education. So the population growth has to be fought not only for economic growth, but also it is linked with educational growth, and none of them is possible if the increasing population nullifies all the achievements. More mouths to feed and more minds to nourish means extension of poverty and backwardness. It is not disconcerting that while there is claim for increase in the percentage of literacy, the actual number of literates is increasing. So this state of affairs mars all the progress that is claimed to have made since independence and indicates most forcefully the urgent need for curbing the population growth on the one hand and of intensifying efforts for expansion of enrollment on the other. Unless a large portion of the resources is mobilized to eradicate illiteracy, the plan for socialism will remain remote goal. So in this context, the Qatari Commission remarked, the social distance between the rich and the poor, the educated and the uneducated is large and is tending to widen. Education itself is tending to increase social segregation and widen class distinctions. So what is worse, the segregation is tending to widen the gulf between the class and the masses. So wastage and stagnation is another important factor in this regard. Further, the problem of universal education assumes staggering dimensions when, along with the lack of universality in enrollment, one is faced with the problems of wastage and stagnation, which is the most important manifestation of the education problems affecting the way of attaining universality of retention. So it was the Hartog Committee in 1929 which first drew pointed attention to the wide prevalence of wastage and the stagnation in the elementary education in the country. The committee defined to merge wastage the premature withdrawals of children from school at any stage before the completion of the primary course, and the stagnation was defined to mean the retention of a child in a class for a period of more than 1 year. Ever since the report of Hartog Committee, the problems of wastage, stagnation, and lapse into illiteracy have been discussed almost continuously, and a number of significant issues have been raised. So, what is wastage, and how can it be measured? How are the causes of, what are the causes of wastage? What program of action can be devised to reduce or eliminate the evil? Yes. It may therefore be assumed that if literacy were to be the objective of elementary education, a child must spend about 4 years in schools, and that the child who lives before reaching class 4 may be treated as a case of wastage. Uh, there also appears to be a general agreement on this issue because statistics of wastage, which are being published since 1930, generally classify children who leave school before reaching class 4 as cases of wastage. Clear? It would not, however, be proper to regard literacy as the aim of elementary education. Elementary education should prepare a child to be a useful and responsible citizen of the country, and one should therefore expect him to spend not less than 7 to 8 years at schools, which is the minimum period considered necessary for reaching the objective. So the second objective of elementary education should be to enroll every child in school at the age of 6 or 7 and to retain him or her in school till he completes the age of 14. So from this point of view, one should regard every child who leaves the school before completing the age of 14 or reaching class 8 as a case of wastage. It will, however, take some years before this large objective of elementary education is realized. So for the time being, therefore, it would be desirable to concentrate attention on retaining every child in school for a period of at least 4 years and consider the problem wastage mainly on that basis. So it is common experience of primary school teachers that all children who are admitted to class 1 and not able to complete the primary education within the prescribed minimum period. So some of the dropouts, I mean, leave the school at one stage or the other, and some fail in one class or other. So if a child leaves the school without completing the primary course, or if he fails in a class, then the investment doesn't give commensurate returns. As such, both money and human resources are wasted. So this is what is called the educational wastage. Thus, educational wastage has two components. Number one, failure or great repetition. Number two, dropout, which means premature withdrawal. In our country, about 70% of children are not able to complete their primary education within the prescribed minimum periods, particularly in rural areas. Thus, there is a huge wastage of educational investment which our country can ill afford. Then, what are the causes of wastage and stagnation? Yes, following are the attributes for the causes of wastage and stagnation, and these are grouped into social, economic, and educational. So let me start with social cause first. Uh, Class and the caste distinction is there in the case of some general, the former in urban areas and the later in rural areas. So especially in the case of girls, still persisting customs of early marriage, the opposition to send grown-up girls to schools, especially of co-education, then problems of untouchability, traditional prejudices like prejudices, etc. So under economic cause, the people of India are economically backward. The economic condition of the Indians doesn't allow their children to prosecute their study. Studies conducted on the subject shows that 65% of wastage is due to poverty. And in this regard, Qatari Commission pointed out that a child is sent to school between 6 and 8 years age because at this stage he is more an essence at home than health, and at the age of 9 or 10 the child becomes an economic asset because he can work at home or earn something outside. So this is especially true of girls who have to assist the overworking mothers at home. uh, and the third cause of wastage in the stagnation is I listed earlier is educational. So with this, let me say thank you once again for attending to my class.